Imagine a time when the promise of eternal salvation was enough to send tens of thousands of men, women, and children on a perilous journey. A time when a single sermon by a powerful leader could spark wars lasting centuries. Wars that would change the course of history. This was the age of the Crusades, a time of faith, bloodshed, and ambition. In the heart of medieval Europe, a fire was ignited, fueled by faith, power, and ambition. It spread across nations, crossed seas, and plunged two civilizations into centuries of warfare. The Crusades, wars that shook both East and West, changed the world forever. But what were the Crusades truly about? Were they battles fought for faith, driven by the desire to reclaim holy lands? Or were they political struggles for power and influence, masked in the garb of religious zeal? This documentary will journey deep into the heart of the Crusades, unraveling the complex relationship between the Church and these bloody wars. From the stirring call of Pope Urban II to the ultimate decline of the Crusader states, we will explore how the Church shaped and was shaped by these violent centuries. The Crusades and the Church, a saga of faith, conflict, and conquest. The genesis of the Crusades. To understand the Crusades, we must first understand the world of medieval Europe and the Church that reigned over it. The Catholic Church of the 11th century was not just a religious institution. It was the cornerstone of European society. Its influence was political, cultural, and spiritual. The Church, led by the Pope in Rome, shaped every aspect of life. It held the keys to salvation, governed moral conduct, and determined the fate of kings. Yet, as the Church expanded its influence across Europe, it was also confronting threats from within and without. In the East, the Byzantine Empire was under siege by the advancing Seljuk Turks. The holy city of Jerusalem, sacred to Christians, Muslims, and Jews, had fallen into Muslim control. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for something unprecedented, a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from the Muslims. His words were spoken to an audience of nobles, bishops, and common folk at the Council of Clermont in France. From Jerusalem and the city of Constantinople comes a grievous report. An accursed race has violently invaded the lands of these Christians. I, or rather the Lord, beseech you as Christ's heralds to publish this everywhere, and to persuade all people of whatever rank, foot soldiers and knights alike, to carry aid promptly to those Christians. Causes of the Crusades. Pope Urban II's call to arms was the spark, but the causes of the Crusades run deeper. Religion was central. Jerusalem, the Holy Land, was the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. For centuries, Christian pilgrims traveled to this sacred place, but under the rule of the Seljuk Turks, these pilgrimages became dangerous, even impossible. Yet, religion was only part of the story. Politically, Europe was a fragmented continent of competing kingdoms. The Crusades offered an opportunity for knights and nobles to gain land, wealth, and glory. They were also a way for the Church to extend its influence over the warrior class of Europe, who often fought among themselves. Pope Urban II promised that those who took up the cross would be absolved of their sins. For many, the Crusades became not just a holy war, but a personal path to salvation. Pope Urban VI promised that those who took up the cross would be absolved of their sins. For many, the Crusades became not just a holy war, but a personal path to salvation. The First Crusade. When 1096 to 1099, answering Pope Urban's call, thousands of knights, nobles, and common folk took up the cross, marking the start of the First Crusade. It was a monumental effort, with men from all corners of Europe marching toward the Holy Land. The journey was grueling. Crusaders traveled through treacherous terrain, faced starvation, disease, and hostile forces. Many perished before even reaching Jerusalem. But those who survived arrived with a singular purpose: to reclaim the city in the name of Christ. The Crusaders' first major victory came at Antioch, a strategic city on the way to Jerusalem. After months of brutal siege warfare, they broke through the defenses and claimed the city. With Antioch secured, the Crusaders marched on to their ultimate goal: Jerusalem. The Siege of Jerusalem, 1099. In 1099, the Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem, a city sacred to all three Abrahamic faiths. For weeks they laid siege to the city, enduring harsh conditions and constant attacks. On July 15, 1099, the Crusaders breached the city's defenses. What followed was a massacre. Thousands of Muslims and Jews were slaughtered as the Crusaders claimed Jerusalem in a bloody conquest. Though the Crusaders had achieved their goal, the victory came at a terrible cost. The brutality of the First Crusade would cast a long shadow over future crusades and relations between Christians and Muslims for centuries. The role of the papacy. As the Crusader states were established in the Holy Land, the Church's role in the Crusades expanded. The Pope became not just the spiritual leader, but the architect of the crusading movement. The papacy issued indulgences, promising Crusaders forgiveness of sins and eternal salvation. This spiritual reward was a powerful motivator, fueling participation in subsequent crusades. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, the fall of Edessa in 1144 sent shock waves through Christendom. It was the first major Crusader state to fall to Muslim forces, and its loss triggered a call for a new wave of Crusaders. Pope Eugenius III, eager to defend Christian territory, called for a second crusade, urging kings, nobles, and knights to once again take up the cross. The response was significant, with two of the most powerful monarchs of Europe leading the charge: King Louis II of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany. However, unlike the First Crusade, which had enjoyed early successes, the Second Crusade would end in disaster. The Crusaders faced logistical challenges from the start. Emperor Conrad's forces were devastated by ambushes and harsh conditions in Anatolia, leaving only a fraction of his army to continue the journey. King Louis VII's forces fared little better, struggling through Byzantine territory where they received little support. When the Crusaders finally reached the Holy Land, their target was the city of Damascus. But despite their efforts, the siege of Damascus ended in failure. And the Crusaders, despite their resolve, were faced with unexpected challenges from the beginning. Emperor Conrad III's army, moving through Anatolia, was ravaged by constant ambushes from the Seljuk Turks. The terrain was unforgiving, and the lack of adequate supplies weakened the once mighty German forces. By the time Conrad reached the Holy Land, his forces were drastically reduced. Meanwhile, King Louis VII of France faced similar setbacks. His army, struggling through Byzantine territory, was often met with indifference or outright hostility from the Byzantines, who saw the Crusaders as a threat to their own security. Louis VII's army also suffered from hunger, desertion, and disease, weakening their numbers significantly before they even reached their goal. When both leaders arrived in the Holy Land, they aimed to recapture the city of Damascus, a critical stronghold for Muslim forces. The city was seen as a key to defending the remaining Crusader states. However, internal divisions among the Crusader leaders and lack of a clear strategy led to disorganized assaults and a lackluster siege effort. The siege of Damascus in 1148 was a disaster. Despite initial progress, the Crusaders were unable to breach the city's defenses, and within days, they were forced to retreat. This failure not only demoralized the Crusaders but also weakened their position in the Holy Land. After the crushing defeat at Damascus, the Second Crusade came to an abrupt and humiliating end. King Louis II and Emperor Conrad III returned to Europe in disgrace, their reputations tarnished. The Second Crusade had failed to achieve any significant victories, leaving the Crusader states more vulnerable than ever. The failure of the Second Crusade marked a turning point in the crusading movement. It highlighted the growing disunity among European leaders and the increasing difficulty of maintaining control over distant territories in the Holy Land. The Crusader states, once seen as the triumph of Christian Europe, now appeared fragile and exposed. The rise of Saladin and the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192. As the Crusader states struggled to maintain their foothold in the Holy Land, a new leader emerged from the Muslim world, one who would reshape the balance of power in the region. His name was Saladin, and under his leadership, the Muslim forces would reclaim Jerusalem and inspire one of the most legendary crusades in history. Born in 1137 in the city of Tikrit, Saladin, or Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, rose to prominence as a brilliant military commander and statesman. In 1187, his forces decisively defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin, a victory that would change the course of the Crusades. Following this victory, Saladin recaptured Jerusalem, the holiest city for Christians, a staggering loss that sent shockwaves through Europe. The fall of Jerusalem sparked outrage and desperation among Christian rulers in Europe. Pope Gregory VIII issued a new call for crusade, urging Europe's monarchs to unite in a campaign to retake the Holy City. Among those who answered the call were some of the most powerful rulers of the time: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. These three monarchs would lead the Third Crusade, one of the most famous and well-documented crusades in history. Yet, despite their shared goal, the Third Crusade would be marked by rivalry and division, as well as moments of intense bravery and diplomacy. The first tragedy of the Third Crusade came early. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, eager to reclaim Jerusalem, set out with one of the largest Crusader armies ever assembled. But during the long journey through Anatolia, Barbarossa drowned while crossing a river. His death caused his army to scatter, with many returning home before ever reaching the Holy Land. Despite this setback, Richard the Lionheart and Philip II pressed on, leading their armies to the Holy Land. The Siege of Acre in 1191 marked the first major battle of the Third Crusade, with the Crusaders eventually capturing the city after months of fierce fighting. The victory at Acre was a significant morale boost for the Crusaders, but it came at a high cost in terms of lives lost. Throughout the crusade, Richard and Saladin engaged in a series of battles and diplomatic negotiations, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Though Richard proved himself a brilliant military commander, he was unable to recapture Jerusalem. However, in 1192, Richard and Saladin reached a truce that allowed Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem, even though the city remained under Muslim control. Though the Third Crusade did not achieve its ultimate goal of recapturing Jerusalem, it cemented Richard the Lionheart's reputation as one of the greatest Crusader kings in history. His battles with Saladin became the stuff of legend, and the truce they reached helped to stabilize the region, if only temporarily. The Fourth Crusade, the 1202 to 1204, the sack of Constantinople. As the 13th century dawned, Europe once again turned its eyes toward the Holy Land. But the Fourth Crusade, rather than striking a blow against Muslim forces, would forever alter the course of Christian history by turning against one of its own, the Byzantine Empire. The Fourth Crusade began in 1202 with a plan to sail from Venice to Egypt, seen as a stepping stone to retaking Jerusalem. However, financial problems quickly derailed these plans. The Crusaders, unable to pay the Venetians for the fleet they had commissioned, struck a deal with the Doge of Venice. They would assist in capturing the Christian city of Zara in exchange for the necessary funds. This attack on a Christian city shocked the Catholic Church. Pope Innocent III, furious with the Crusaders for turning their weapons against fellow Christians, excommunicated the entire crusading army. But this would not be the end of the Crusaders' betrayal of their original mission. In 1204, the Crusaders were diverted once again, this time to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. A political dispute within the city offered the Crusaders an opportunity. They could install a Byzantine prince who had promised them wealth and support for their crusade. But when this plan fell apart, the Crusaders, driven by greed and frustration, sacked the city. The sack of Constantinople was one of the most devastating events in medieval history. The Crusaders looted the city's treasures, desecrated its holy sites, and installed a Latin emperor on the Byzantine throne. The Byzantine Empire, once the greatest Christian power in the East, was left in ruins. The Fourth Crusade, rather than advancing the cause of Christendom, deepened the divide between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, a rift that remains to this day. The Crusaders' betrayal of Constantinople marked the beginning of the end for the Byzantine Empire, which would never fully recover from the devastation. The Children's Crusade, 1212. In 1212, a remarkable and tragic event unfolded across Europe, the so-called Children's Crusade. Unlike the previous crusades, which had been led by kings and knights, this movement was driven by ordinary children, inspired by a vision to reclaim Jerusalem through faith alone. Thousands of children, many from France and Germany, set out on what they believed would be a peaceful pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Convinced that God would part the seas and allow them to walk to Jerusalem, they were filled with religious zeal and a sense of divine purpose. But this crusade, like so many others, would end in tragedy. Upon reaching the Mediterranean, the children found no miraculous path to the Holy Land. Instead, many were sold into slavery or perished along the journey. The Children's Crusade was a poignant reminder of the dangers of unchecked religious fervor and the exploitation of innocent lives. Though the Children's Crusade never reached the Holy Land, it became a powerful symbol of the innocence lost during the Crusades. It highlighted the deep faith that motivated so many crusaders, but also the tragic consequences of misguided idealism and the manipulation of the vulnerable. The Fifth Crusade, 1217 to 1221. The failure of the previous crusades did not deter the Church from calling for yet another campaign to reclaim the Holy Land. The Fifth Crusade, launched in 1217, was a concerted effort by Europe's Christian leaders to strike at the heart of Muslim power by invading Egypt, a strategic and wealthy center of Islamic authority. The logic behind this strategy was simple. Egypt was the key to controlling the Holy Land. The Crusaders, under the leadership of King Andrew II of Hungary and Cardinal Pelagius, arrived in Egypt and captured the port city of Damietta in 1219 after a grueling siege. It was seen as a significant victory, giving them a foothold in the Nile Delta and a bargaining chip in their campaign to reclaim Jerusalem. But their success was short-lived. The Nile, as it had done for millennia, shaped the fate of Egypt. Unfamiliar with the flooding cycles of the Great River, the Crusaders found themselves trapped when the waters rose. Their lack of knowledge about the local environment proved disastrous. Egyptian forces, under the command of Sultan al-Kamil, saw their opportunity and struck. The Crusaders, weakened by disease and hunger, were forced into retreat. Sultan al-Kamil, in a gesture of diplomacy, offered to exchange Damietta for Jerusalem. But Cardinal Pelagius, emboldened by the earlier victory, refused, believing more Crusader reinforcements would soon arrive. That decision would prove costly. In 1221, the Crusader army, attempting to advance deeper into Egypt, was decisively defeated at the Battle of Mansoura. With their forces in disarray and unable to press on, the Crusaders were forced to surrender. They were allowed to leave Egypt, but only after agreeing to return Damietta to Muslim control. The Fifth Crusade, despite its early promise, ended in yet another failure. The dream of reclaiming Jerusalem seemed ever more distant, and the hope that Egypt would serve as a stepping stone to victory had been dashed. The Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229, Frederick II's diplomatic victory. Unlike the Crusades before it, the Sixth Crusade was not won through bloodshed, but through diplomacy. At its heart was one of the most enigmatic rulers of medieval Europe, Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor. Often at odds with the Church, Frederick had been excommunicated for delaying his promised crusade. But in 1228, he set out to the Holy Land, not with a massive army, but with a plan for negotiation. Frederick, well-versed in Arabic and with a deep understanding of Muslim culture, saw an opportunity to negotiate where others had failed. Sultan al-Kamil, who had already offered Jerusalem to the Crusaders during the Fifth Crusade, was now more open to a peaceful resolution, as his resources were stretched thin by internal struggles. In 1229, Frederick II achieved what few Crusaders had before him. Through careful diplomacy, he secured control of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth for the Christians, without a single battle. The Treaty of Jaffa marked a temporary peace, with the Muslims retaining control of the Temple Mount and other holy sites, while Christians were granted access to their sacred places. Frederick's entry into Jerusalem was met with both celebration and controversy. Though he was crowned King of Jerusalem, many within the church viewed his diplomatic approach with suspicion. His excommunication by the Pope still stood, and his victory, though bloodless, was not universally welcomed in Europe. Frederick's triumph, however, was short-lived. By 1244, Jerusalem was once again captured by Muslim forces, and the gains of the Sixth Crusade were lost. Yet, Frederick II's diplomatic achievement remains a unique chapter in the history of the Crusades, proving that in a time of constant warfare, peace could sometimes be won through negotiation. The Seventh and Eighth Crusades, 1248 to 1254, 1270, the last Crusader king, the Seventh and Eighth Crusades, led by King Louis IX of France, represented the last major attempts by European monarchs to reclaim the Holy Land. Louis, later canonized as Saint Louis, was driven by a deep religious conviction that it was his duty to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control. But his campaigns, though marked by personal bravery, would ultimately end in failure. Following the strategy of the Fifth Crusade, Louis' strength aimed to capture Egypt as a stepping stone to Jerusalem. In 1249, his forces successfully took the city of Damietta, but, like his predecessors, Louis underestimated the challenges posed by the Nile's flooding. As his army advanced further into Egypt, they were met by the forces of the Mamluk Sultanate. The Battle of Mansoura proved to be a disaster for the Crusaders. Louis's army, weakened by disease and logistical problems, was outmaneuvered and eventually surrounded. In 1250, King Louis IX was captured by the Mamluks, and his release was only secured through a massive ransom. Despite his defeat, Louis' faith remained unshaken. He returned to France and spent years rebuilding his kingdom and preparing for another crusade. In 1270, Louis launched the Eighth Crusade, this time targeting the city of Tunis in North Africa. But the campaign was doomed from the start. Shortly after landing in Tunis, Louis IX fell ill, likely from dysentery, and died in 1270. His death marked the end of the era of crusading kings. Though Louis was revered for his piety and later canonized as a saint, his crusades had failed to achieve their goals, and the dream of a Christian-controlled Jerusalem was fading. With Louis IX's death, the major crusades came to an end. Though there would be smaller crusading efforts in the following years, the age of large-scale crusades led by kings and emperors was over. The failure of the Seventh and Eighth Crusades symbolized the growing disillusionment in Europe with the crusading movement. The legacy of the Crusades. The Crusades, though centuries passed, left an indelible mark on both the Christian and Muslim worlds. For nearly 200 years, men and women from across Europe embarked on a series of religious wars that reshaped the political and cultural landscapes of the Middle East and Europe alike. While the Crusades are often remembered for their violence and bloodshed, they also contributed to a greater exchange of knowledge, ideas, and culture between East and West. European crusaders encountered advanced Islamic science, medicine, and philosophy, which would later influence the Renaissance and the intellectual flowering of Europe. Yet the Crusades also left a legacy of mistrust and hostility between Christians and Muslims that lingers to this day. The wars, fought in the name of religion, served to deepen the divide between East and West, and their echoes can still be felt in the geopolitical struggles of the modern world. Historians continue to debate the legacy of the Crusades. Were they a misguided expression of religious zeal, Or were they a necessary response to the expansion of Islamic power? Were they a tragic waste of life? Or did they serve as a catalyst for cultural and intellectual exchange? The answers to these questions are complex, but one thing is clear. The Crusades left a profound and lasting impact on the course of world history. Jerusalem, the city that was the ultimate prize of the Crusades, remains a symbol of both division and unity. For Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike, it is a city of immense spiritual significance. And while the Crusades failed to secure lasting Christian control of the Holy Land, they succeeded in shaping the destiny of nations, faiths, and peoples for centuries to come. The Crusades were a unique period in history, a time when faith, politics, and warfare collided on a global scale. They were driven by a desire to reclaim the Holy Land, but they became so much more than that. They reshaped the world, created legacies of both cooperation and conflict, and remain a powerful symbol of the complex relationship between religion and power.
Thank you for watching this documentary. If you enjoyed the content and want to explore more fascinating stories from around the world, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Global Documentaries channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what topics you'd like to see next. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.